Such an honor to be in a room that is so warm and so welcoming, where we can have these kind of conversations. It's something that I've been looking forward to. This is my first time giving this talk, so as always, I'm always open to new feedback, but it's also fantastic to have this kind of audience to be able to give this kind of talk within. So what I wanted to share today was my experience basically becoming a better leader based upon my own stories and my mistakes. And I also talk fast, which if I talk too fast, just raise your hand and slow me down. I don't mind. But I also have the cheese in the mind that we need to all get to. So a little bit about me. My name is Elaine Wherry. And just a little bit about my background. So I grew up in Southwest Missouri, and I actually grew up on a goat farm. And my mother was a goat judge, and I was a huge part of 4-H. I don't know if there are any 4-H. Woo! 4-H! Yeah! I would love to say it was 4-H that brought me to Stanford, but it was actually the violin. And I thought I was going to study violin and economics at Stanford. But lo and behold, within my first few weeks, I discovered the computer. And after I discovered computers and coding, there was really no looking back. And I majored in a major called symbolic systems, which confused the heck out of my parents. Interdisciplinary major about computer science, logic, linguistics, philosophy, and psychology. And then in 2001, I joined a company called Synaptics, who manufactured input devices. And I was really, really lucky because one of the projects they were working on at the time was manufacturing a circular scroll wheel for the first iPod. So from there, about 2 years in, I started getting itchy, and I was like, oh, I kind of want to code something on my own. You know, it's one thing to code things for other, companies. So I started working on projects, and 2 years later, one of those projects that I was working on in my spare time spawned into Nebo. For those of you who aren't familiar with Nebo, it started out in 2005, and we allowed people to do online messaging without a download. Then we took that real-time technology, and we allowed other sites to be able to have social, chat, sharing with just kind of 1 or 2 lines of code, and then suddenly they were a social website. Exited it about, 18, 20 months ago to Google, and right now I'm independent, and my next kind of passion project, I'm working on a graphic novel, and the graphic novel, thank you, the graphic novel is about leadership. And it's about all the mistakes that everybody makes from their first day on the job all the way to their last job as potentially CEO. And being in a co-founder experience, you get to see everybody kind of in a very compressed time frame, and I started realizing everybody was making the exact same mistakes. And so I started recording them. So it's a huge project, and I promised my husband I will be done soon, but the truth is I'm still illustrating every single day, but I'm getting there. So, and in addition to that, I do some writing, I do some speaking, I do some advising, but what I'm here to do today is really simple. I'm here just to tell a personal story. I'm here just to share 12 tips, that's it, and then to open it up to any Q&A, and then we'll go eat cheese. All right. So I'm going to start off with one of my most embarrassing moments, which harkens back to 2007. And of all of the blogs that I've ever written, this is the one that embarrasses me the most. And in it, I basically say, I don't know, how old was I then? I don't even know. Basically said, I've never been aware of any bias, and anyone who says otherwise is making it a bigger deal than it should be. I didn't actually say that. Those weren't my real words, but that was kind of the center of energy that it was coming from. And so to this day, I'm super, super glad that this is no longer on Google and that nobody can pull it up, because basically what I was doing was, for the next few years, that was in 2007, I basically shut myself off from any of these conversations. And I was just basically saying, hey, there is no conversation, there is no issue, why should we have conversation about this? And in addition, I was saying, hey, I'm female. I have natural female-to-female empathy, right? Like, this still isn't my problem. And I just wanted to be able to do my own thing, be able to say the success was my own, and I didn't want to draw any attention to my own gender. So, fast forward a few years. And last year I was in Nebo, I had an exec coach, and she was amazing, and I loved her so much. And I had one personnel issue, and I was trying, and it just blindsided me, and I didn't know where in the world it came from. And it was within my last year at Nebo, and she said, Elaine, I think it's because you're female. And I think everybody kind of has their aha moment where they wake up and they realize, oh my gosh, like this is legitimate, this is real. And this was my moment. And it was even more of a shock because honestly, I think she was very, very right. And especially as leaders, self-awareness is huge. And the fact that I wasn't necessarily aware that this was a part of my identity that other people were perceiving was a big awakening call. So I kind of had this, uh-oh, right? Holy cow, like I've been closing myself off from the world, and now I am part of the problem too. And even looking back in that, at that point it was probably like the 6-7 year mark, I could see places where I had been a propagator. And that was something that I really wasn't like very proud of. But at the same time, it just gave me a lot of wisdom that I could start passing on to others. So that's what I'm here to share today. So 12 tips follow a general arc, which is, being able, as a leader, being able to build your workforce, starting with attracting talent, interviewing talent, managing talent, and then thinking about how to be able to help people move forward in their careers. And they're all based upon little short stories and anecdotes. So I'm going to start with attracting talent. Oh boy, so you thought I showed you the most embarrassing moment? No, just kidding. My first job fair. That is my student ID. There you go. So one of the things that I did, looking back, and this is more personal, not necessarily drawing upon my Depot experience, but one of the things I did was I had gone to Stanford. I knew CS. I was coding in the summer. And when I first entered the job market, I was terrified of applying to Google. I should have applied to Google. That is the place where I should have gone, or I should have applied to a startup. But I didn't want to go through the interview process. I didn't want to share my GPA, and I didn't want to risk applying for a role that I didn't think I was qualified for. And so in school, it's a meritocracy. And you can have that kind of attitude, and at the end of the day, your grades will justify itself. And what I didn't realize is that that doesn't necessarily work in the business setting. So my first tip is once you get to the job fair, it's too late. And so, I applied for a human factors researcher role that didn't really entail coding. And when I was there, I was never considered a coder, even though from there, just to brag a tiny amount, right? I went on to lead our JavaScript front-end team. I received a Tech Fellows Award, and I've had engineering patents, right? Clearly, I was there, but when I started, everybody was like, oh, yeah, she just does human factors research, right? Businesses aren't meritocracies, I've already touched upon that. And if you don't value yourself, no one else will either, right? So as a leader, when I'm talking to other companies, and they're like, how do I get more female talent? Nobody's applying. I'm like, you're going there too late. By the time people get to the job fair, they've already decided which roles they are and are not going to apply for. And so now, one of my favorite tips and tricks for being able to get more people to apply for business is to actually go to the student presentations. And it's reaching out to them. I'm sure that there are other tips and tricks too, but it's one of my few opportunities to go out before they've decided which roles they want to apply to and say, wow, I love your work. Here is my business card. I would love to see you. You are exactly the type of person who would thrive and do really, really well within my company. That's tip number one. Tip number two. So interviewing talent. This is just a small little snippet from a graphic novel, and this is exactly how I think about interviewing young men and young women. So this is an excerpt, but in the first one, I have the character's name is Jacob. Jacob saying, hey, they're trying to build stars. And he's just like, hey, you want me to build stars? Stars are easy. I haven't made one, but I know I could. And then the manager's response when she's interviewing this candidate is to say, whoa, this guy is fabulous. Then, when you are interviewing a younger female, they interview differently. Just from my own personal experience, they definitely interview differently. What happens is, hey, I don't want to make any assumptions about my skills, so I brought my portfolio for you to evaluate. And then it's just like, well, I'm not really getting any go-getter vibes here, right? And so that's one of those things where even within the context of my company, whenever we were managing somebody who was different, I was always like, hey, wait a second, let's really make sure that we're looking at results and not behaviors. So here's where I start talking about personal stories. So I'm anonymizing all of the names, of course, but when I think about one of the early interviews I had where I didn't do this, I'm just going to call her Pam. She didn't work at Mevo, so I don't have to worry so much about anonymizing it. It didn't look like this. Interviewed somebody that I should have hired, and her name was Pam, and she had a computer science degree from Princeton. And she was one of the first people that I'd interviewed after interviewing tons and tons and tons of young males coming out of all of the local universities. And if I go back on my notes say, oh gosh, diligent but not hardcore. Probably better for a later stage company. And I told her, hey, you know what? I think you'd be really good at product management. Have you considered that? That is exactly the wrong thing that I should have said. And looking back, I can see why I said it. And hopefully I got better about it, but of all of the times where I look back and I'm like, I made a mistake, I messed up on Pam. Modesty kills interviews, but why do we do it, right? We project modesty because it shows that you value team. We project modesty because it demonstrates that you're easy to work with. But what actually happens is people consider you for more people-facing roles, and then you're perceived as not a great fit for the technical aspects. Oh, that's painful. Like, I'm trying to get as much engineering talent, female engineering talent into this world as I possibly can, and here I am being part of the problem. Tip number 2, removing the spotlight. One of the other things that's really hard is getting younger female to vocalize, hey, this is why I'm great, and to get rid of the modesty and have them actually talk about their accomplishments. So one of the tips I have is to ask them what other people would say about them. If you say, hey, that's great, but can you tell me what such and such person would say about you, you're much more likely to get kind of an answer that doesn't make them feel like they are tooting their own horn. Give them permission to brag up front. Just say, hey, I want to hear your greatest accomplishment, and I wanted to knock my socks off. And ask about previous projects. And a lot of times people hear we, and they think, oh, but I'm not sure if she really did all of that work. It's like, ignore the we, and if you're worried about it, just ask for details about the project. You're going to get that information if you need it in better detail there. So, next story is about Martians. So, I have this term called Martians, and it's like the Martian has landed. And the story starts with an amazing male engineer who was on the East Coast, and we were probably team size of about 4 then, and we were trying to hire one of our very, very first engineers. So we found this guy who was doing something totally different for his day job, but at night he was basically working on the open source version of our company. Crazy. He showed up. We only had a day to interview him. And I had like my little checklist, and I was just like, so tell me what would happen if it's 2 a.m. and you accidentally deleted the entire repository. I had asked this question to a bazillion people, and they're all like, oh, wow, well, I'd probably make a few phone calls, I'd probably rally the troops, and I'm like, what happens if there's like, if it's for a deadline for the next day? I rally the troops, we get through it, we try and figure out, and people will walk me through the step of them going and basically having a sleepless night to save the day. So I asked this guy, who came all the way out from the East Coast, I'm like, what would you do if you deleted the repository? And his answer was, well, I would probably go back to bed and I'd probably sleep because I'm probably not going to get anything done if I haven't had any sleep anyway. And I was like, you know what? He's probably right. Right? Like, when you have something like that happen, sure, you send out an email, but the likelihood of you actually being able to pull off an all-nighter and be productive and rally the team, it's not totally realistic. And this type of situation where I had Martians basically give me answers that totally threw my checklist and all of my previous answers out the door happened over and over and over again. So whenever we had anytime we had somebody who was different based upon whether it was the geography, whether it was based upon gender, whether it was based upon school, whether it was based upon even a new function, in our company we talked about interviewing the Martian and being open to Martians and just saying, hey, when it happens, just identify it. Say, hey, I think we've got a Martian. I think we need to be aware that this person is not going to answer questions like we're accustomed to, and let's still make sure that we think we're evaluating them fairly. That's a Martian tip. Other thing I did, may or may not be relevant, is to make sure, again, with measuring results, instead of doing whiteboard challenges, one of the most effective things I had was spot the bugs. How many people are engineers here? Am I speaking to? Okay. Instead of doing whiteboard challenges, I would present them with code pre-written, and ask them to evaluate that code. And that ended up being a much better way to be able to be like, okay, how many of the bugs, I knew that there were like 30 bugs in here, and I could actually go through and count how many bugs were they able to identify, and not necessarily look at the way that they were presenting it, but look at the actual results of their interview question. Managing talent. All right. So this is one of the most important stories, and this is my story of Chloe. This is my biggest regret in terms of management. Chloe was incredibly bright. She came out of Stanford, computer science, but she had less experience with JavaScript. We brought her on board and gave her bug projects and smaller things to work on independently. And I thought that by doing this, I was really doing her a service and ramping her up, etc. But what I began to realize is that engineers in particular, they tend to gain credibility through knowledge expertise. And bug fixing and easy projects were actually a disservice to her. Because instead of being like, hey, you're an expert, you understand this area, I was like, oh, you're the person who gets the bugs and gets the easy project and who works in a silo over here. Now, if I had to do it again, I know that if I said, hey, Chloe, I want you to own this area. I am giving you 2 weeks. I want you to come back and I want you to give a demonstration to the entire team. And the entire team is going to come to you whenever they have questions about this. She would have had that pale-faced, holy cow moment, and then she would have owned it. And then she would have been able to get much more credibility within that team. If I could go back in time and redo anything, that is that I wish that I had been able to help Chloe out more. Instead, what ended up happening is she went to Google, which is good for her, so. Oh, Kat. This is another story, but this is not from me, it's from my husband. And he had an employee reporting to him, and I happened to be there at the time, who came to him and said, hey, my husband's name is Todd, hey Todd, I'd really like to be able to maybe come in and evaluate all of these performance issues that you're having on the weekend. And my husband, who is incredibly busy, manager type, is like, holy cow, awesome, okay, if you want to come in on the weekend, sounds good to me. And it was because I was there, and I was able to look at that interaction, where it's just like, that's not really what's happening here. What's really happening, of course, you're a busy manager, and who doesn't like free work? But what she was trying to say is, hey, you have a performance issue. I don't want to point to anybody on the team. And as a way of being able to show you this issue and tell you that I think it is important, I am volunteering to come in on the weekend and fix it. I was like, Todd, that's not really what she was saying. She was not saying that she wanted to do free work and give up all of her future weekends. She was trying to alert you to a problem, and you got to be able to read between those lines. And of course, after one weekend, starts eating at you, and then if you continue to do this, there's a risk of burnout and a sentiment within your culture of, if anything is going to improve, I'll have to do it myself, which is not healthy. Number 7, and this just goes into the communication and reading between the lines. Don't take questions at face value, and particularly from younger women. Do you think we have enough people on the project? That is not actually a question, right? What happens, and I see myself doing this too, right, is you get a response which is like, well, let me think about that. Yeah, we definitely have enough people on the project. Yeah, we're doing great, Let me explain to you why we have enough people on this project. And you actually end up getting into a part where instead of bringing the conversation closer, now it's gotten further apart. And the appropriate response to that is, of course, tell me why you're asking that question. Tip number 8, be familiar with I language. I think, how many people have been taught to always phrase feedback in terms of I feel or I think, right? Yeah, I have too, right? But it's also a surprise when all of a sudden you realize you're talking to somebody who is not familiar with that language. And you just get, hey, I feel like there might be a better way to approach this problem, right? And what I'm really doing is saying, hey, I'm asking you for permission to voice conflict, right? And the expected reply from me is, yes, tell me more. But what actually happens is, well, that's great that you have feelings, but do you have any specific recommendations? You are wasting my time. Right? It's just this big communication drift that's happening. Tip number 9, I'm sorry is not guilt. Right? So I'm sorry means I'm politely recognizing that this is a tense situation. As in like, hey, I'm sorry to interrupt for a second. That does not mean that I feel guilty for interrupting you. I'm interrupting you for a reason that I probably feel is very legitimate, right? I'm just saying, recognizing, hey, I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a conflict. Does not mean that you feel personally responsible. And so when people say, hey, I'm sorry about something, or are very quick to say, I'm sorry, it's probably more that they are being polite rather than, I feel like I've done something wrong. And I feel like that's one of the things that I learned within my co-founders is not to be so quick to say, I'm sorry, because they were saying, hey, go fix it, go. And I'm just like, whoa. I'm just a Midwestern polite person. That was not really what I meant, Reviews and career paths. So, quick story about 9th grade. In 9th grade, I was in geometry class. I just switched schools. And for the first quarter of my high school, the geometry teacher asked us all to submit what we think our grade should be for that class. And we had like a really loose grading structure. It was all going to be based upon the final and some other things. And so I said, you know what? I feel like, and keep in mind that I was doing all the bonus problems and I was really working hard. And I said, you know what, I feel like if I really am true to myself and what I think I can do, I'd probably give myself a C. Right? And I expected him to look at my homework and be like, oh, well, she's just saying that because she's hard on herself. No. I got my report grade back, and it was, I can't remember if it was a B- or a C+, but I was like, whoa, holy cow. Obviously, we are not there was no conversation about this is actually going to, like, go onto your report card, but if you go to my freshman year, first quarter, there's that grade, right? And so, similarly, you would have think that I would have learned about this, but a while ago I was showing my graphic novel to an author that I really respect. I've never illustrated before, and I know that I'm doing a pretty good job, right? But to this person, I said, listen, I know I still have to work on my line weights, I know I still have to work on my collars, but I'm really excited about this. I'd love to be able to get your feedback. And the first thing he said is, well, first of all, you're going to have to work on that self-doubt. And I was like, whoa, like, if you could hear my internal brain is thinking, I'm going to write the world's best management book, right? I'm just trying to be, a nice person, and, I know you're in the management book, I know I'm about to write a management book. And the thing is that self-criticism can actually be a disguise of ambition. When I say, hey, I've never done this before on my line weights, it's like, dude, I know it's already awesome, and it's only going to get better, right? That's how I want it to be interpreted. And when I say, hey, I get a C in geometry, what I really mean is, dude, I think I could take it to the next level. Not that I think I'm doing a mediocre job, right? It's that translation gap. And the other thing is going back to just being polite people, right? I also don't want to paint a target on my back as being somebody who is going to be hyper-competitive and going after your management slot or whatever it is. I'm just like, hey, listen, I'm being true to myself. This is how I evaluate myself and where I want to go. Tip number 11, Anna. Oh, okay. And this goes back to when, since coming out of Mevo, I've talked to a lot of different startup teams, and I love working with entrepreneurs. And one of the things that is really hard is whenever I'm talking to a team where it's either a female CEO or the team dynamic is more towards females than males, I find I have to really reorient myself. And the reason is that whenever I hear a pitch from traditionally more male counterparts, it's like, I'm going to change the world. This is a billion dollar opportunity. There's this force inevitability that's going to happen. Yeah, there are risks. If you want to point them out, that's fine, but we already know about them, and you better take cover. It's going to happen. And then when I have teams that are traditionally more female, it's, hey, this is my plan for the first quarter, and this is what I would like to be able to achieve. I'd love to be able to get your feedback. And when you talk to VCs, what VCs say is, hey, I am so accustomed to hearing about how they're going to take over the world, I naturally take a haircut. Right? And then when you hear something that's actually realistic, and it's just like, hey, this is all the stuff that's going to happen in the short term, then when you take that haircut in your brain, you naturally end up, selling these people short in front of you, which is really hard to admit, but it's true. Like, I've seen myself in that position, and I'm like, yeah, that does happen. And so, to presenters, I think one of the things is, being aware of those haircuts. And the other thing is that whenever I'm talking to somebody who is, talking about their company, I'm saying, hey, listen, I will be happy to give you feedback, and we can talk about all of the details later, but right now, I want you to pitch me as almost like a CEO. And as a CEO, you have to make sure that you can grab confidence and that you can project and all these things. I want you to pitch it to me with tons and tons of bravado as a CEO would. And just setting that context and saying you have permission to play this role is really helpful. And then, if you're in a situation where somebody is haircutting and they are underselling themselves, which still tends to happen, the biggest compliment you can say is, you know what, this is awesome, and I think you can go even bigger. Because what it's saying is, you know what, I'm calling you out on that underselling bluff, and I'm giving you permission to talk about it in even bigger, better context next time. Oh, I forget about these stories, and I see it, I'm like, oh, I'm going to tell this story too. Okay, well, we're almost done. So she's, so one of my, not that I have favorites, but one of my favorite team members, when she first came on board, she didn't eat lunch with the team. And she had a tendency to take walks and do a bunch of other things during lunch. But when it came time for the first review, and team function was one of the things that we looked at, everybody wanted to give her basically the lowest possible score that you could because she didn't eat lunch with the team. And it broke my heart because there were so many other ways that she was helping out on a team level. So if you had a deadline coming up and it was a team, the teams were really pulling together, she would send encouraging emails. She would show up before meetings and she would help gather chairs. She would make sure that people got birthday cards, like all these other things. And it was just, hey, listen, we're not evaluating this person in the right way. If she wants to be able to eat lunch for herself, so be it. And this is one of the situations I actually got right. And so I was just like, holy cow, we are not doing that in review. We totally have this wrong. And to the person that she was reporting to, I was like, over my dead body, we're doing that review. And so that is a success story. But then when we look at other functions, right, within the organization, there are stereotypes associated with these different functions that we don't necessarily think about. And one of them is to be a product person, you have to be gadgety. And, I consider myself a product person. I love design, but when I'm thinking about how I want to spend my own personal savings, I don't necessarily want to go out and buy every single thing just to be able to clutter my closet. When I first came into school, people said, hey, you should have the latest iPod or the latest whatever. I was like, whoa, that's like $400, and I don't even have pots. And, I have different priorities right now, I'm not going to be able to go out and get that gadget. But there are lots and lots of different parts of being a product that I think I am strong with, like design, reading user reviews, and watching product launches. Another one is engineering equals brain teasers, right? What is really the correlation between answering the first question and coding? You're in a car with a helium balloon tied to the floor. When you accelerate, what happens to the balloon? Hey, can you code C? Who knows based upon that first question, right? That correlation is actually pretty weak. Other one is just saying, on the reverse, if somebody is people-oriented, try not to make the reverse correlation, which is to assume that they are generalist, good with managing people, or that they should be in customer-facing roles. Being a people-oriented person...
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What's bad about those three things?
Oh, nothing at all, right? But it's, like for me in an engineering role, it meant that I didn't give people an opportunity to be experts. And especially in engineering roles, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
stroking out here.
Cool. That's great, that's what this is about.
Engineers should be generalists, should be managers, and should be customer focused.
That's what she's saying. That's what she's saying.
They should. Really? Is that what you're saying?
I am absolutely saying that. So
Okay,
like when I'm saying, if I see a people-oriented engineer, right? My first inclination, I don't mean to be controversial about this, right? But my first inclination is to say, hey, maybe they should work in usability, maybe they should work in product management, maybe they should work on all these other things. When the truth is, holy cow, they're great engineers. They should stay in that role and benefit the organization, and the organization will need people-oriented engineers. Yeah, okay?
Oh yeah.
Which is good, I appreciate conversation. This is helpful feedback.
Just giving me a whole different vibe, but that's okay. I'll ask you about that later.
Okay, sure. Tip number 12 comes back to be aware of function stereotypes. People-oriented people can be experts. Being an early adopter is an expensive hobby. Engineering is about solving problems, not necessarily, doing it in this kind of brain teasery logic way. And don't encourage all women to go into management, customer-facing roles. We need experts in those roles too. Final tip. Plane crashes. So Malcolm Gladwell, I think it was in Outliers, I don't remember exactly. Somebody else here has probably read this more recently than I have. Had a really, really interesting observation. I think this was back in his 2008 book. And he talked about airlines, and he suggested that one of the reasons that plane crashes happened was because of communication mismatches between the traffic controller and the pilot. Yeah.
That's in Blink.
Is it Blink? Thank you so much. Was in Blink. And he basically talks about, hey, both sides were talking, but they weren't really communicating. And one of the things that happened was they went through and talked about who has the responsibility to make sure that there's actually, beyond communication, understanding. And the thing is that an exec's responsibility, when you get to a certain point, is you have the responsibility to communicate across all cultures and all backgrounds. And it's not necessarily about whether you're a woman, whether, whatever. It's about diversity and being able to bring out the best in your team members. And every exec has to unlearn some behaviors and modify their approach to be effective. And I think that was my biggest takeaway. Knowing what those behaviors are, and for me, knowing, hey, you grew up in a culture where these were the ways that you were brought up is really, really important, so that moving forward, you can be a stronger leader. So those are my tips, and now I will open it up to questions. Thank you. Okay.